Hi, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who tries to make the law make sense here on YouTube. Somebody on Quora asks this question: what are the arguments against the eviction moratorium? Well, in just a moment, I'll clue you in. The CDC's eviction moratorium simply has no basis in fact or law. And it was terrible policy. It was implemented by people who clearly do not understand science or law. And it should have been undone and never redone. But Mr. Biden, for whatever reason, doesn't believe that the Constitution actually prohibits him from doing anything. So in this particular instance, he is ignoring the clear mandate of the United States Supreme Court, and ultimately I think that will not be good for him. Now, the main problem that I see with this eviction moratorium is that there is absolutely no link between keeping people from being evicted and the spread of COVID-19. The spread of COVID-19 is governed by droplet infection. It's going to occur whether someone is in their home or whether they're not in their home. If you believe that people who are not evicted somehow stay in their house 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, then perhaps there would be a linkage. But the fact of the matter is people leave houses even when they're facing eviction. And they have to go to the grocery store, they have to go to the doctor, they have to go to the hospital, whatever. There are places that they have to go, and so they're going to be out in the community. Now, the argument, I suppose, is that if they're evicted, they would have no place to lay their head at night. And that may be true, but there are a number of options available to people in that situation. A number of charities, a number of churches, all kinds of community resources that people can rely on. And nobody has drawn a scientific arrow between evictions and the spread of the disease. So that's the first strike, in my opinion, with respect to COVID-19 and the eviction moratorium. Okay, the second thing that sort of is a problem here is that the CDC has no authority to enjoin the use of private property by anyone. It is not a lawmaking body. It does not have regulatory authority. It simply cannot do what it says it did. And that's what Clarence Thomas, when he wrote the opinion in the case that held that the eviction moratorium was unlawful and had to end, Clarence Thomas told them that. He gave them until the end of July, and he gave the Congress a chance to pass something which Congress did not do. CDC is without authority. That's the other reason this moratorium should be scrapped. But I think the third and probably the most important reason why this is such a bad public policy is because it only burdens one class of individual. Basically, what you are telling people who own property, particularly people who may own a piece of property that they inherited or that they bought specifically to conduct a business, a side business of being a landlord. You're telling them that their property has no value. You're telling them that you're going to take that property for the use of someone who refuses to pay for it, and you're not going to do anything about it. Nobody has offered these people any compensation for what has been taken, and that also is against the law. The Fifth Amendment of the Constitution specifically prohibits the government from taking private property for public use without just compensation. And that's essentially what we have here. We have the government telling private individuals, landlords, that, hey, we need your property. We need to keep people in these properties. You can't evict them because otherwise society is going to fall apart. Now, that's a little bit of hyperbole, but that's essentially what the government is saying. And in that situation, the government should be required to pay compensation. Now, at this point, the lawyers haven't brought out the long knives and sued for just compensation, but that's coming. And it's coming probably sooner than later. And when it comes, there is going to be an accounting for this, and I don't understand how in the world a court cannot see that this is a taking of private property. Now, the whole principle behind that provision of the Constitution is that it is not right to burden the individual for something that should rightly fall upon society at large. In other words, why make the landlord fork over his rents when you could spread that across the entire population, perhaps with tax revenue or whatever? You could essentially convert these private properties into Section 8 housing under the government program. But the bottom line is they did not do that, and it is a government taking without just compensation. That is certainly another reason why these moratoriums are a bad idea. Another thing that is a feature of property law, and particularly as it relates to landlords and tenants, is that if a landlord goes to evict a tenant and then sues for back rent, he has to show that he mitigated his damages and immediately tried to relet the property. Well, if you prohibit him from evicting the tenant and he's not getting any revenue from the tenant, then he has absolutely no way to mitigate his damages. And all of these people who are staying in these properties and who are not paying rent and who are subject to eviction, they are one day going to have to face the piper. Either they are going to have to take bankruptcy to clear these debts, or they're going to wind up working in a job where they wind up having their paycheck garnished to pay back the landlord. And that, particularly if it's a low-level or low-paying job, you could take years where your paychecks are being garnished. And of course, nobody who is an employer likes to get a garnishment on one of their employees. So there's all kinds of really good reasons not to have this eviction moratorium. I am not without some degree of empathy for the people who are about to be evicted from their properties. I think that it's a tragic thing when you cannot make enough money to pay your rent. But there are alternatives. There are places you can go and things you can do to improve your lot in life. And so much of what we see in this situation is people who took their stimulus checks and spent them on frivolities, and instead of spending it to pay their rent, which would have been the really smart thing for them to do. Now, here's what's going to happen when they get in front of a judge. The judge is going to ask them how they spent their stimulus, particularly if they're asking for more time or not to be evicted. Judge, I can pay this. I just need to get back to my job, and then I'll make a little money, and then I'll be able to pay. The judge is going to ask, what did you do with your stimulus check? And if the answer is, well, I bought a flat screen TV with it, then there's a pretty good chance the judge is not going to give them that additional time. It would be a pretty pudding-headed judge that would do that, simply because, again, the landlord has rights here too. And indeed, property rights are one of the fundamental values built into the United States Constitution. So those are the arguments against the eviction moratorium. I hope that you found this interesting, perhaps thought-provoking. You may not necessarily agree, and if you don't agree, please leave your comments down below. Just keep them respectful. If you haven't already, I'd really appreciate it if you come over here and subscribe to the channel. And if you would, I'd appreciate it if you'd touch that notification bell so you can be notified whenever we release a video. And give me a big thumbs up on this video, especially if you liked it, because that tells YouTube that the content is worthwhile and useful for other folks. So thanks again for watching. Have a terrific day, and I'll catch you on here next time.